I was in the middle of installing a new transfer switch when my phone buzzed with a text from my wife saying someone from the HOA was standing in our driveway taking pictures of our backup generator. My name is Kyle Emerson, and I work as the Emergency Power Systems Technician for St. Catherine's Hospital in Phoenix, Arizona. It's a job that comes with a lot of responsibility. When the grid goes down, I'm the guy who makes sure the backup generators keep running so that patients on life support, surgical teams in the middle of operations, and critical care units don't lose power. I've been doing this for 12 years, and in that time, I've seen what happens when backup power fails. It's not pretty, and it's something I take very seriously both at work and at home. 6 months ago, my wife Jennifer and I moved into a planned community called Desert Vista Estates. The neighborhood was beautiful, with neat rows of stucco houses, well-maintained lawns despite the Arizona heat, and a community pool that our kids loved. What I didn't love was the HOA. I should have read the covenants more carefully, but when you're moving and trying to get everything settled, you don't always catch every detail. I installed the backup generator at our house 3 months after moving in. It wasn't a cheap unit either. I spent nearly $8,000 on a natural gas-powered Generac that could run the entire house for days if needed. Given what I do for a living, having reliable backup power wasn't just a luxury, it was a necessity. If the power goes out in the middle of the night and the hospital calls, I need to be able to get ready, check my equipment, and head out the door without fumbling around in the dark. Plus, Jennifer has asthma, and our youngest son has a medical nebulizer he sometimes needs. The generator gave us peace of mind. I got all the proper permits from the city. I had a licensed electrician friend help me install the transfer switch. Everything was up to code, inspected, and approved. What I didn't do was submit an architectural modification request to the HOA. Honestly, it didn't even occur to me that a generator would need approval. It wasn't like I was painting my house hot pink or putting up a giant statue in the front yard. That mistake came back to haunt me 3 weeks later, when I received a certified letter from the Desert Vista Estates HOA. The letter, signed by the HOA president, a woman named Patricia Whitmore, informed me that my generator was in violation of Section 7.3 of the Community Covenants, which stated that all exterior modifications must be approved in writing before installation. I was being fined $500 and given 30 days to remove the generator or submit it for approval. I wasn't too worried at first. I figured I'd just fill out whatever paperwork they needed, explain that it was for medical and professional reasons, and they'd approve it retroactively. I was wrong. The Architectural Review Committee, which consisted of Patricia and 2 other board members, denied my request. Their reasoning was that the generator was visible from the street and detracted from the aesthetic uniformity of the neighborhood. They suggested I could resubmit if I built an enclosure that would completely hide the unit and dampen the noise, with the enclosure subject to their approval, of course. Building an enclosure would cost another $3,000, and even then, there was no guarantee they'd approve the design. I tried to reason with them. I sent emails explaining my job, the medical equipment we had in the house, and the importance of backup power. I even offered to plant some decorative shrubs around it as a compromise. Every email was met with the same response: "We appreciate your situation, but rules are rules, and the covenants must be enforced uniformly." The fines started piling up. After the initial 30 days, they added another $500. Then it became $100 per week. Within 2 months, I owed the HOA over $3,000 in fines, and Patricia was sending increasingly threatening letters about placing a lien on my property. I consulted with a lawyer who specialized in HOA disputes. He told me I had a decent case, especially given the medical necessity angle, but litigation would be expensive and time-consuming. He recommended I try mediation first. I reached out to Patricia about mediation, but she refused, saying there was nothing to mediate since the covenants were clear. Things came to a head on a Tuesday morning in early October. I had just gotten home from a night shift at the hospital. We'd had a minor power blip around 3 in the morning, and I'd spent 2 hours running diagnostics on all the backup systems to make sure everything was functioning properly. I was exhausted and looking forward to getting a few hours of sleep before I had to pick up my kids from school. I pulled into my driveway and immediately knew something was wrong. There was a truck parked in front of my house with Desert Vista Property Services written on the side. 2 men in work uniforms were standing next to my generator with tools, and Patricia Whitmore was supervising them with a clipboard in her hands. I got out of my truck fast. "What's going on here?" Patricia turned to me with that fake smile that HOA board presidents seem to perfect. She was in her late 40s, with blonde hair styled in that speak-to-the-manager cut and wearing a pantsuit that looked too formal for standing in someone's driveway at 9 in the morning. "Good morning, Mr. Emerson. We're here to remove the unauthorized structure from your property. As you were notified multiple times, you failed to comply with the community covenants, and the board voted last week to exercise our right to remedy the violation at your expense." "You can't just take my generator," I said, trying to keep my voice level. "That's theft." "It's not theft when it's clearly outlined in the covenants you signed. Section 12.4 gives the HOA the right to remove violations after proper notice has been given. You've had ample opportunity to comply." One of the workers had already disconnected the gas line and was working on unbolting the unit from its concrete pad. These guys worked fast, like they'd done this before. "Stop," I said, stepping toward them. "I'm telling you right now to stop." Patricia held up her hand. "If you interfere with HOA business, I'll have no choice but to call the police. This is being done legally and properly. The unit will be stored at our facility, and you can reclaim it once you've paid all outstanding fines and agreed to remove it from HOA property permanently. This is my property. I paid for this house. You own the house, but you're bound by the covenants. Everyone in this community has to follow the same rules. If we let you keep an unapproved generator, what's next? People putting up sheds without approval, painting their houses whatever color they want. The covenants exist to protect everyone's property values." I wanted to argue more, but I could see it was pointless. The workers already had the generator loaded onto a hydraulic lift. Short of physically fighting them, which would definitely get me arrested, there was nothing I could do. I pulled out my phone and started recording. "Fine, take it. But I'm documenting everything and you'll be hearing from my lawyer." "That's your right," Patricia said, completely unfazed. "Have a nice day, Mr. Emerson." I watched helplessly as they loaded my $8,000 generator onto their truck and drove away. My hands were shaking with anger and exhaustion. I went inside and found Jennifer in the kitchen. She'd watched the whole thing from the window. "I can't believe they just did that," she said. "Can they really do that?" "Apparently they can," I said. "I need to call the lawyer." I spent the next hour on the phone with my attorney, Michael Cohen. He was sympathetic but not optimistic about getting immediate relief. "They're technically within their rights if the covenants are written the way you described. Your best bet is to file an injunction and argue medical necessity, but that'll take time. We're talking weeks, maybe months. I need that generator back now. What if there's an emergency?" "I understand, but the legal system doesn't work that fast. Let me draft a demand letter and file the paperwork. In the meantime, document everything. After hanging up with Michael, I tried to calm down and get some sleep, but I was too wound up. I kept thinking about the smug look on Patricia's face and the casual way she'd had my property seized. The whole thing felt like an abuse of power. The situation got exponentially worse 2 days later. Arizona was in the middle of an unseasonably hot October, and the power grid was strained. Rolling blackouts had been announced for some areas as the utility company tried to manage demand. I was at work on Thursday afternoon when the hospital administrator, David Morrison, called an emergency meeting with all department heads and essential personnel. "We've been notified by the power company that there's a significant chance of an extended outage this weekend," David said. "They're doing emergency maintenance on a major substation that serves this area. If something goes wrong, we could be without grid power for an extended period. I need every department to review their emergency protocols." As the emergency power systems tech, I was critical to those protocols. I spent the rest of the afternoon running tests on all 6 of the hospital's backup generators. These were massive units, industrial diesel generators that could power the entire facility. But they needed maintenance and monitoring, especially during extended outages. The hospital's emergency plan included me being on site 24/7 during any major power event. They kept a small apartment in the facility for essential personnel who needed to stay overnight. But there was a problem. Jennifer and the kids would be home alone, and without our backup generator, if the power went out, they'd have no way to run the nebulizer if our son had an asthma attack. I called Jennifer that evening. "There's a chance of a major power outage this weekend. The hospital needs me here. Can you take the kids and stay with your sister in Tucson?" I already called her. "She's going out of town this weekend. What about your parents?" My parents were in their 70s and lived in a retirement community in Flagstaff. That was over 2 hours away in the opposite direction. That's too far. If something happens at the hospital, I couldn't get back in time. "So what do we do?" "Let me think about it. Maybe I can get a portable generator from somewhere." But that was easier said than done. With the threat of blackouts, every hardware store within 50 miles was sold out of generators. I called 6 different places. Nothing. I even tried rental companies, but they were all booked up. Friday morning, I woke up to an email from the power company confirming that the substation maintenance would begin at midnight and could result in outages lasting up to 72 hours for some areas. Our neighborhood was in the affected zone. I forwarded the email to my lawyer. "Can you use this to get an emergency order to force the HOA to return my generator? My family has medical needs, and we're facing a 3-day blackout." Michael called me back within an hour. "I can try, but getting an emergency hearing on a Friday afternoon is almost impossible. Most judges are already gone for the weekend. I'll make some calls, but don't count on it." I was running out of options. That's when I decided to go directly to Patricia. I drove to her house, a large 2-story place on the corner lot that was naturally bigger than everyone else's. I rang the doorbell, and she answered wearing yoga pants and a tank top, clearly not expecting visitors. "Mr. Emerson, this is not appropriate. Any communication needs to go through proper channels." "Patricia, please just listen. There's going to be a massive power outage this weekend. My family has medical equipment we need to run. I need my generator back just temporarily. You can find me more, whatever you want, but my son needs his nebulizer. If your son has medical needs, you should go to a hospital for 3 days. You want me to take my 8-year-old son to an emergency room and sit there for 3 days because you won't give me back my own property. I understand you're upset, but I can't just make unilateral decisions. The board voted on this. The generator is being held until you comply with the covenants. Then call an emergency board meeting. I'll sign whatever you want. I'll agree to build the enclosure. Just let me have it back for this weekend. Patricia crossed her arms. The earliest I could schedule a board meeting would be next week. I have commitments this weekend. I'm sure you'll be fine. People survived before generators existed. That's when I lost my patience. You know what, Patricia? This is insane. You're holding my property hostage over aesthetics during a medical emergency. If something happens to my son because you wouldn't return my generator, I'll sue you personally. Her face hardened. Are you threatening me? Because if you are, I'll get a restraining order. You need to leave my property now. I left before I said something I'd really regret. I sat in my truck and tried to think. I called Jennifer and told her to pack bags for her and the kids. I'd figure something out, maybe book them a hotel room with backup power. That's when my work phone rang. It was David Morrison, the hospital administrator. Kyle, where are you? We need you here now. The power company just moved up their timeline. The substation is going offline in 2 hours and we're expecting immediate outages. I need you monitoring the generators. I'm on my way, I said, my heart sinking. There was no time to find a solution for my family now. I drove straight to the hospital and spent the next hour prepping all the systems. At exactly 3:15 p.m., the grid power cut out. There was that brief moment of silence when everything goes dark, and then the emergency generators kicked in with their familiar rumble. Lights flickered back on, medical equipment continued humming, and life went on inside the hospital as if nothing had happened. But I couldn't stop thinking about Jennifer and the kids sitting at home in the dark. I texted her to let me know they were okay. She responded that they were fine. They dug out flashlights and battery-powered lanterns, and the kids thought it was an adventure. That made me feel slightly better, but I was still furious at the HOA. The generators ran smoothly through Friday night. I did my rounds every 2 hours, checking fuel levels, oil pressure, temperature gauges, and electrical output. Everything was nominal. Around 6 a.m. on Saturday morning, David Morrison came down to the generator room. "How are we looking?" he asked. "Perfect. All systems running exactly as they should. Fuel consumption is where I expected it to be. If the outage only lasts 3 days like they're saying, we have more than enough diesel on hand." Good. The power company is saying now that it might be longer. They found more damage than expected at the substation. Could be 4 or 5 days. I groaned. My family is at home without power. Can't they stay somewhere else? I explained the whole situation with the HOA and the seized generator. David's face went from concern to alarmed as I talked. "Wait, your backup generator is gone, the one at your house." "Yeah, why?" "Kyle, you're listed as one of our essential emergency personnel. Your contact information, including your home backup power, is in our emergency management plan. We have you listed as having reliable home infrastructure specifically so that you can shelter in place if needed and still respond to calls. What happens if we have a critical failure here and I can't reach you because your phone died and you couldn't charge it?" I didn't think about that. This is a serious problem. Our emergency certification with the state requires all essential personnel to have documented backup plans. If inspectors found out that one of our key people doesn't actually have the backup power we said he has, we could face major issues. David pulled out his phone and made a call. "Janet, it's David. I need you to pull the emergency management documentation we filed with the state, specifically the essential personnel section." He waited. "Yes, that's the one. Read me what we have listed for Kyle Emerson." His face got more concerned as he listened. And that's part of our certified plan. Okay, thanks. He hung up and looked at me seriously. We certified to the state that you have backup power at your residence as part of our emergency response infrastructure. That's on file with the Department of Health Services. If we can't actually meet the requirements we certified, it's a big problem. What are you saying? I'm saying I need to make some calls. This might be bigger than just your personal situation with the HOA. I went back to my monitoring duties, while David went upstairs to make his calls. I didn't think much more about it until about an hour later when David came back down with two other people, one of whom I recognized as the hospital's general counsel, Sarah Martinez, and the other was someone I didn't know, a man in a suit carrying a briefcase. "Kyle, this is Robert Chen from the Arizona Department of Health Services," David said. "He needs to ask you some questions." Robert shook my hand. "Mr. Emerson, I understand you're the primary emergency power systems technician for this facility." "That's right. And according to the hospital's emergency management plan filed with the state, you have backup power at your residence to ensure you can respond to emergencies and maintain communication even during extended outages. Is that accurate?" "That was accurate until about a week ago." "Can you explain?" I went through the whole story again: the generator installation, the HOA violations, the fines, and finally the seizure of my equipment. Robert took notes on everything. "So your homeowners association currently has possession of the backup generator that this hospital certified you would have access to for emergency purposes?" "Yes." Robert looked at David and Sarah. "This is a violation of your emergency management certification. You're required to notify the state within 24 hours of any material changes to your emergency preparedness capabilities." David looked worried. "We didn't know about this until this morning." "Then you need to rectify it immediately. Either confirm that Mr. Emerson can resume his role as planned, or designate a new primary technician who meets the requirements. Given the current power emergency, I'd strongly prefer the former." Sarah, the hospital's lawyer, spoke up. "What authority does the state have here?" "Can you compel the HOA to return the generator?" "Not directly," Robert said, "but I can escalate this. A hospital's emergency preparedness is a matter of public health and safety. If an HOA's actions are interfering with certified emergency infrastructure, that becomes a very serious issue." "Let me make some calls." Robert stepped out of the room with his phone. I looked at David. "Is the hospital going to get in trouble because of this?" "I don't know," David admitted. "But right now, I'm more concerned about making sure we maintain our emergency operations." "You're the only person on staff who can manage these systems. The backup tech we have listed is retired and living in Nevada now. If something goes wrong and you can't respond because you don't have power at home, people could die." That put the situation in stark perspective. This wasn't just about my inconvenience or the HOA being petty. This was about the hospital's ability to function during an emergency. Robert came back about 20 minutes later. "I've briefed my supervisor and the emergency management coordinator for Maricopa County. They're treating this as a potential threat to critical healthcare infrastructure. They're contacting the HOA now." "What does that mean?" I asked. "It means that your HOA is about to get a call from the county emergency management office explaining that they're interfering with certified hospital emergency operations. They'll be strongly encouraged to return your generator immediately." I couldn't help but feel a bit of satisfaction at that. Patricia was about to get a call from someone she couldn't just dismiss. The next few hours were tense. I continued my monitoring rounds while everyone waited to see what would happen. Around noon, David got a call. He answered, listened for a few minutes, then held the phone away from his ear. Even from several feet away, I could hear someone yelling on the other end. It was a woman's voice, shrill and angry. David finally interrupted. "Madam, I don't know what to tell you. We didn't create this situation. You seized equipment that's part of our emergency infrastructure. The state is involved now." More yelling. "That's something you'll have to take up with the county. I just run the hospital." He hung up. "Let me guess, Patricia Whitmore," I said. "She's very upset. She seems to think we're conspiring against her personally. She's threatening to sue the hospital for harassment." Sarah, the lawyer, shook her head. "Let her try. We documented everything properly. She's the one who created a public health issue." About an hour later, David got another call, this time from the county. After he hung up, he looked relieved. "The County Emergency Management Office has issued a formal order to the HOA requiring immediate return of your generator. They're classifying it as essential emergency infrastructure. If they don't comply within 6 hours, they'll face penalties of $10,000 per day and potential criminal charges for interfering with emergency services." "They can really do that?" I asked. Robert nodded. "During a declared emergency, which this power outage qualifies as, the county has broad authority to commandeer or access resources needed for public health and safety. A generator that's part of a hospital's emergency plan falls under that umbrella." I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. "So I'll get my generator back." "You should." The order was very clear. I called Jennifer to let her know what was happening. She was relieved but also worried. "Is the HOA going to retaliate? Can they kick us out of the neighborhood?" "I don't know, but right now I don't care. Let's deal with one crisis at a time." Around 4 p.m., I got a call from an unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. "Mr. Emerson, this is Officer Jake Williams with the Phoenix Police Department. I'm currently at your residence with representatives from your HOA. We need you to be present to accept return of your property. I'm at work at the hospital. I can't leave right now. Is there anyone else who can accept it on your behalf? Your wife, perhaps?" "Yes, Jennifer Emerson. She's there now." "Okay, we'll handle it with her. But you should know that the HOA president is refusing to personally return the generator. She's claiming this is government overreach and that her rights are being violated. Can't you just make her return it? We're working on it. It's a bit of a situation here." He hung up and I immediately called Jennifer. "The police are there." "Yeah, there are 2 cop cars, a county vehicle, and the HOA truck. Patricia is standing in the driveway yelling at everyone. Some of the neighbors are watching. It's like a circus. Just let the police handle it. Don't engage with Patricia." "I'm staying inside." "Oh wait, hold on, they're unloading the generator now. Patricia just sat down on our lawn. I think she's staging a protest or something. This would have been funny if it wasn't so absurd." A grown woman, the president of an HOA, sitting on my lawn refusing to allow the return of my own property during a power emergency. Jennifer narrated what she could see. "The police are talking to her. She's refusing to move. Now one of the officers is on his radio. This is insane, Kyle." "I know. Just stay inside and stay safe." About 15 minutes later, Jennifer called back. "They arrested her. They actually arrested Patricia. She wouldn't move and she started screaming at the county guy that he was a fascist and this was illegal seizure. The cops warned her twice, and then they handcuffed her and put her in the police car. The generator is back in place now. The HOA workers reconnected it." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Patricia had actually gotten herself arrested rather than simply allow the return of my generator. The pettiness was staggering. Officer Williams called me back. "Mr. Emerson, your generator has been returned and reinstalled. The HOA workers confirmed it's properly connected. We had to arrest Miss Whitmore for obstruction and refusing a lawful order." She'll be processed and released, probably later tonight. Thank you, officer. I appreciate your help. No problem. For what it's worth, I've dealt with a lot of HOA disputes, and this is one of the more ridiculous ones. Good luck. I felt like I could finally breathe. The generator was back. My family would have power, and I could focus on my job. David came down to check on me after I told him the news. Crisis averted, he asked. Looks like it. Thanks for escalating this. I never would have thought it would become this big. When it comes to hospital emergency preparedness, we don't mess around. The state takes it very seriously, and so does the county. Your HOA learned that the hard way. The rest of Saturday passed without incident. The hospital generators continued running perfectly. I did my rounds, monitored the systems, and grabbed a few hours of sleep in the on-call room. Jennifer texted me updates throughout the day. The generator was running at home, they had power, and everything was fine. Several neighbors had stopped by to ask what happened, and word was spreading quickly through the community about Patricia's arrest. Sunday morning, I got a call from Michael, my lawyer. Kyle, I just got a very interesting email. The HOA board is requesting an emergency meeting with you and me. They want to discuss a resolution. What kind of resolution? They're not specific, but reading between the lines, I think they want to make this go away. Patricia's arrest is public record now, and I'm guessing they're worried about liability. We scheduled the meeting for Monday evening after the power was expected to be restored and I could leave the hospital. I spent Sunday continuing my monitoring duties and thinking about what I wanted from the HOA. At minimum, I wanted all the fines dropped and written approval for my generator. But after everything they'd put me through, I wanted more than that. The power came back on Monday afternoon at around 2 p.m. The substation repairs were complete, and the grid was restored. I supervised the transition from generator power back to grid power, making sure all the automatic transfer switches worked correctly and that the generators properly shut down and cooled. Everything went smoothly. By 6 p.m., I was finally able to leave the hospital. I'd been there for almost 72 hours straight, surviving on catnaps and bad coffee. But there was no time to rest yet. The HOA meeting was scheduled for 7 p.m. at the community center. I met Michael in the parking lot. He was carrying a folder full of documents. I've prepared a settlement proposal. Let's see what they have to say first. We walked into the community center's meeting room. The HOA board was there, all 5 members, including Patricia. She looked terrible, tired and angry with dark circles under her eyes. Also present was a man in a suit who introduced himself as Gerald Foster, the HOA's attorney. Gerald started the meeting. Thank you for coming, Mr. Emerson, Mr. Cohen. I think we can all agree that the situation over the weekend was unfortunate and escalated beyond anyone's intentions. The board would like to find an amicable resolution. Michael leaned back in his chair. I'm listening. Gerald slid a document across the table. The board is prepared to offer the following. All current fines against Mr. Emerson will be waived. His generator will be retroactively approved for installation without need for an enclosure or modification, and will add an exemption to the architectural guidelines for emergency medical equipment. That's a start, Michael said, but it doesn't address the damages my client suffered. What damages? Patricia spoke for the first time, her voice sharp. We returned his generator. Nothing was damaged. Michael pulled out his own documents. Mr. Emerson spent approximately 40 hours dealing with this issue, including consulting with attorneys, making phone calls, and attending meetings. As a skilled technician, his time has monetary value. He also suffered emotional distress from having his family's medical safety compromised. And there's the matter of the hospital's potential loss if his employment had been affected by your actions. I'm sure the hospital would be interested in pursuing damages if they felt their emergency operations were compromised. Gerald held up his hand. Let's not get ahead of ourselves. What are you proposing? Full reimbursement of all legal fees my client has incurred, which currently total about $3,000. A formal written apology from the board. Permanent approval of his generator with no restrictions. And modification of the HOA covenants to create a clear exemption for emergency and medical equipment so this never happens to anyone else. Patricia looked like she wanted to argue, but Gerald put his hand on her arm. The board needs to discuss this privately. Can you give us a few minutes? Michael and I stepped out into the hallway. Do you think they'll go for it? I asked. They don't have much choice. The alternative is protracted litigation that they'll almost certainly lose, plus the publicity from Patricia's arrest. They want this to go away quietly. He was right. After about 15 minutes, Gerald called us back in. The board agrees to your terms with one modification. The legal fee reimbursement will be $2,500, not $3,000. Michael looked at me. I nodded. I just wanted this over with. We have a deal, Michael said. Gerald had apparently come prepared with documents already drafted. We spent the next hour going through everything, making modifications and finalizing the agreement. Patricia signed with visible reluctance, her pen practically stabbing through the paper. As we were wrapping up, Patricia couldn't help herself. I hope you're happy. You've made a mockery of this community's standards. What I'm happy about, I said, keeping my voice level, is that my family is safe and I can do my job. That's all I ever wanted. You're the one who made this into a fight. If we let everyone do whatever they want, this whole community falls apart. There's a difference between maintaining standards and being tyrannical. You couldn't tell the difference and it got you arrested. Her face flushed red, but Gerald cut in before she could respond. I think we're done here. The agreement will be filed with the county tomorrow. Mr. Emerson, you should receive your reimbursement check within 30 days. Michael and I left. Outside, he shook my hand. Congratulations. You won. It doesn't feel like winning. It feels like I had to fight a war over something that should have been simple. That's HOAs for you. Power corrupts, especially when that power is over something as petty as neighborhood aesthetics. At least you got a good outcome. I drove home exhausted. Jennifer met me at the door with a hug. Is it really over? It's over. The generator is approved, the fines are gone, and we're getting our legal fees back. Thank God, I couldn't take any more stress. The kids came running to greet me, excited to tell me about their adventure during the blackout. They'd played board games by lantern light, made shadow puppets, and pretended they were camping. They had no idea how close things had come to being really dangerous. Over the next few days, word spread through Desert Vista Estates about what had happened. I got a lot of supportive comments from neighbors, many of whom had their own horror stories about the HOA. Several people told me they were glad someone had finally stood up to Patricia. I also got a few nasty notes, anonymous of course, calling me entitled and saying I thought I was above the rules. Those went straight in the trash. The real fallout came 2 weeks later. I was at work when Jennifer called me, excited. Kyle, you need to check the neighborhood Facebook group. Patricia just resigned from the board. I pulled it up on my phone. Sure enough, there was a post from Patricia announcing her immediate resignation as HOA president, citing personal reasons. The comments section was interesting. Some people thanked her for her years of service. Others said good riddance. A few people openly discussed the generator incident and her arrest. Who's going to replace her? I asked Jennifer. There's going to be a special election. Actually, some of the neighbors have been asking if you'd run. Me? No way. I've had enough of HOA politics to last a lifetime. But the neighbors were persistent. Over the next week, 3 different people stopped by to encourage me to run for the board. Their argument was that someone needed to bring common sense to the HOA, and I'd proven I was willing to stand up for what was right. I talked it over with Jennifer. I really don't want to do it. It's a time commitment and I already work long hours. I know, but think about it this way. You can make sure what happened to us doesn't happen to anyone else. You can be the voice of reason. She had a point. I'd seen how quickly HOA power could be abused. Having someone on the board who understood the importance of flexibility and common sense could make a real difference. I reluctantly agreed to let my name be put on the ballot. The election was held in early November, and to my surprise, I won by a significant margin. Apparently, a lot of people in the community were tired of the heavy-handed enforcement and appreciated someone who'd stood up to it. My first board meeting as a member was awkward. The remaining 4 board members were people who'd voted with Patricia on everything. They were polite but clearly wary of me. I decided to take a diplomatic approach. Look, I know we've had conflicts in the past, but I'm here now, and I want to work with all of you to make this community better. That doesn't mean getting rid of standards, it means applying them reasonably. Over the next few months, we made changes. We revised the architectural guidelines to include clear exemptions for medical equipment, solar panels, and other functional improvements that might not be purely aesthetic but served important purposes. We created an appeals process for people who felt they'd been unfairly cited. And we implemented a policy that required the board to consider health and safety factors before enforcing violations. Not everyone was happy with the changes. I got complaints from some residents who felt we were becoming too lax. But I also got thank you messages from people who appreciated the more reasonable approach. Patricia never returned to HOA activities. I saw her around the neighborhood occasionally, and we'd exchange awkward nods but nothing more. According to neighborhood gossip, she was embarrassed about the arrest and the publicity it generated. The charges against her were eventually dropped as part of a plea agreement where she completed community service, but the incident remained a permanent part of her record. In December, the hospital held its annual recognition ceremony for essential personnel. David Morrison gave a speech about the October power emergency and how the staff had performed. He specifically mentioned me by name. Kyle Emerson not only kept our generators running flawlessly during a 72-hour outage, he also dealt with a personal crisis that threatened his ability to serve. Thanks to his professionalism and the intervention of county emergency management, we maintained our full emergency capabilities throughout the event. Kyle represents the best of what this hospital stands for. I got a plaque and a bonus, but more importantly, the hospital updated its emergency management procedures to include better verification of essential personnel's home preparedness. They also created a fund to help essential employees install backup power if needed, recognizing that it was in the hospital's interest to ensure their key people could function during emergencies. One unexpected outcome of the whole situation was that I became something of a local minor celebrity in HOA reform circles. A local news reporter got wind of the story and did a piece on HOA overreach. It aired in January and got picked up by some national news websites. Suddenly, I was getting emails from people all over the country with their own HOA horror stories. I didn't want to become some kind of anti-HOA crusader, but I did start speaking at community meetings when invited, sharing my experience and offering advice on how to deal with unreasonable HOA enforcement. The main message I tried to convey was simple: document everything, Know your rights. And don't be afraid to push back when the HOA crosses the line. Through one of these speaking engagements, I met a state legislator who was working on HOA reform legislation. She asked me to testify before a committee about my experience. In March, I found myself in the Arizona state capitol, telling my story to a room full of legislators. The result was a new law that passed in May, requiring HOAs to consider health and safety exemptions before enforcing covenant violations, and creating a state-level appeals process for homeowners who felt they'd been treated unfairly. It wasn't a perfect solution. HOAs still had a lot of power, but it was a step in the right direction. Back in Desert Vista Estates, things settled into a new normal. The HOA continued to function, enforcing reasonable standards without the authoritarian approach that Patricia had favored. I served out my term on the board and chose not to run for re-election. I'd done what I wanted to do, and it was time to step back. My generator sat quietly next to my house, properly permitted and approved, running its weekly self-test every Monday afternoon. It never had to kick in for a real emergency again, but knowing it was there gave me peace of mind. One Saturday afternoon in June, I was doing some yard work when a car pulled up and a young couple got out. They looked uncertain, checking a piece of paper against house numbers. "Can I help you?" I called out. "We're looking at houses in the neighborhood," the man said. "We have an appointment with a realtor. Is this a good community?" I thought about how to answer that. "It's a nice neighborhood. Well-maintained, good schools, friendly neighbors. There's an HOA, which means there are rules, but they're applied pretty reasonably now." "We've heard HOAs can be nightmare," the woman said. "Is that true?" "They can be if you get the wrong people in charge." My advice is to read the covenants carefully. Attend a few board meetings before you buy to see how things are run, and don't be afraid to speak up if something doesn't seem right. Most of all, remember that the HOA works for the homeowners, not the other way around. They thanked me and went off to meet their realtor. I hoped they'd be smart about their decision. HOAs weren't inherently bad. They provided useful services and helped maintain property values. But they required vigilance to prevent power-hungry people from turning them into petty dictatorships. That evening, Jennifer and I sat on our back patio, watching the sunset paint the desert sky in shades of orange and purple. Our kids were playing in the yard, their laughter carrying on the warm breeze. "You ever regret installing that generator?" Jennifer asked. Knowing all the trouble it caused, not for a second. It was the right thing to do for our family. The trouble wasn't caused by the generator, it was caused by someone who forgot that rules should serve people, not the other way around. "You sound like a politician now." "God, I hope not." She laughed and squeezed my hand. "I'm proud of you, for fighting back, for not just rolling over." I didn't have much choice. When it comes to protecting my family, I'll fight whatever battles I need to fight. The generator hummed quietly through its weekly test cycle, a familiar and reassuring sound. In my line of work, I'd learned that backup systems weren't just about having power when you needed it. They were about the peace of mind that came from being prepared. That lesson had extended far beyond electrical systems. Life went on in Desert Vista Estates. The community pool hosted summer parties. Kids rode bikes through the streets. Neighbors chatted over fences about everything from sports to politics, to the best way to keep desert landscaping alive in the heat. It was suburban life, with all its mundane rhythms and ordinary dramas. But there was one small difference now. When new homeowners moved in and attended their first HOA meeting, they'd often hear the story of the generator incident, usually told by old-timers who'd been there. The story had become part of the community's folklore, a cautionary tale about what happened when common sense lost out to rigid enforcement. And whenever someone had a question about installing solar panels or medical equipment, or anything else that might technically violate the covenants, the board would carefully consider whether the violation served a legitimate purpose. More often than not, they'd find a way to approve it. That was Patricia's real legacy, not the tight control she tried to maintain, but the reformation that came after she pushed too hard. Sometimes the best lessons come from negative examples. As for me, I continued my work at the hospital, maintaining the systems that kept patients alive during emergencies. It was demanding work, but it was important work, and I was good at it. The generator incident had reminded everyone, including me, just how critical backup systems were. The hospital invested in upgrading several of our older generators and improved our fuel storage capacity. When the next emergency came, we'd be even more prepared. In September, almost a year after the whole ordeal began, I got an unexpected email. It was from Patricia. "Mr. Emerson, I've thought many times about reaching out to you. I want to apologize for how I handled the situation with your generator. I was wrong to be so inflexible, and I let my desire to enforce the rules override common sense and compassion. Getting arrested was humiliating, but it was also a wake-up call. I've spent this past year reflecting on my behavior and working with a therapist to understand why I felt such a need to control things. I don't expect forgiveness, but I wanted you to know that I'm sorry." I read the email several times. It seemed genuine without the defensiveness or justification that usually accompanied apologies from people who didn't really mean them. I showed it to Jennifer. "What are you going to say?" she asked. "I don't know. Part of me wants to just ignore it. But that seems petty." I thought about it for a day, then wrote a response. "Patricia, thank you for reaching out. I appreciate your apology and your willingness to reflect on what happened. I don't harbor any ill will toward you. We all make mistakes, and what matters is learning from them. I hope you're doing well." I never heard back from her, but I felt better having responded. Holding grudges took energy I didn't want to spend. The year anniversary of the power outage came and went. The hospital held a drill to test our emergency procedures, and everything worked perfectly. I ran into David Morrison in the cafeteria afterward. "You know, Kyle, I've been thinking about that whole generator situation. In a weird way, it made us better. We completely revamped our emergency personnel procedures. We're more prepared now than we've ever been." "I guess that's the silver lining," I said. "Though I could have done without the stress. Understandable, but you handled it well. You stood your ground when it mattered." That was the thing about the whole experience. It had been stressful, frustrating, and at times infuriating. But it had also shown me that systems and rules, whether in an HOA or a hospital or anywhere else, only worked when they were applied with wisdom and flexibility. Blind adherence to rules without consideration of their purpose or impact led to the kind of tyranny that Patricia had represented. As I sat in my truck before heading home that evening, I thought about how different things could have gone. If the power outage hadn't coincided with the generator seizure, if the hospital hadn't had me listed in their emergency plan, if the county hadn't taken it seriously, I might still be fighting the HOA in court. Sometimes circumstances aligned in your favor, but you still had to be willing to fight for what was right. I drove home through the familiar streets of Desert Vista Estates, past well-kept houses with neat yards and two-car garages. It looked like 1,000 other planned communities across America, orderly and pleasant and comfortable. But beneath that surface uniformity was a complex web of rules and relationships and power dynamics that could either create genuine community or descend into petty authoritarianism. The key was balance, maintaining standards while respecting individual needs, enforcing rules while allowing flexibility, preserving community character while acknowledging that people's lives were more important than aesthetics. It was a balance that required constant attention and good faith from everyone involved. When I pulled into my driveway, my generator was visible from the street, just as it had been the day Patricia first objected to it. But now it sat there legally, properly approved, an accepted part of the landscape. Sometimes winning meant changing the rules themselves. Inside, Jennifer was making dinner while helping our youngest with homework. The older kids were in the living room arguing about what to watch on TV. It was chaotic and loud and normal, and I was grateful for every bit of it. This was what the generator was really about, not the machine itself, but what it represented, the ability to keep my family safe and comfortable no matter what happened outside. Later that night, after the kids were in bed, I did a final check on the generator, something I did every few weeks out of habit. Everything looked good, fuel line secure, connections tight, no leaks or loose bolts. It was ready to go whenever needed, a silent guardian standing watch. As I stood there in the warm Arizona night, I heard the sound of another generator starting up somewhere in the neighborhood. Someone else had apparently decided to install backup power. I smiled. Maybe they'd read the new architectural guidelines and seen that medical and emergency equipment was now explicitly allowed. Maybe they'd heard the story of my fight with the HOA and decided they weren't going to ask for permission they didn't legally need. Either way, it meant the changes we'd made were having an effect. Desert Vista Estates was becoming a place where people could take reasonable steps to protect their families without fear of bureaucratic retaliation. That was worth all the stress and conflict. The months continued to pass. Desert Vista Estates held its annual meeting in November, and turnout was higher than it had been in years. People were more engaged with the HOA now, paying attention to who was on the board and what decisions were being made. The election saw several new members join, people who'd been motivated by the generator incident to get involved. The new board continued the reforms we'd started. They simplified the architectural approval process, created clearer guidelines about what required approval and what didn't, and established regular office hours where homeowners could come ask questions without having to wait for a monthly meeting. The HOA went from being an adversary to being something closer to what it was supposed to be, a service organization that maintained common areas and helped the community function smoothly. In December, I got a call from Michael, my lawyer. "Kyle, I wanted to let you know that Patricia Whitmore filed for bankruptcy. She's listing legal fees from the generator incident as part of her debts." Seriously, how much could her legal fees have been? From what I heard through the grapevine, the HOA's insurance didn't cover her personal liability, and she ended up paying for their attorney out of pocket because she was worried about being sued personally. Plus, she had her own criminal defense attorney for the obstruction charges. It added up. I felt a complicated mix of emotions. I didn't want to see anyone financially ruined, even Patricia, but she'd brought it on herself through stubbornness and refusal to compromise. That's unfortunate. It is, but it's also a warning to other HOA board members. Abusing your authority can have real consequences. The holidays came and went. Our family settled into comfortable routines. I continued my work at the hospital. The kids did well in school. Jennifer took up painting as a hobby. Life was good, normal, uneventful in the best possible way. The generator ran its weekly tests without fanfare. It never had to kick in for a real emergency that winter. But knowing it was there, approved and legal and ready, gave me the peace of mind I'd been seeking when I first installed it. In February, I gave my last scheduled talk about HOA reform to a community group in Scottsdale. I'd been doing these speaking engagements for over a year, and while I'd enjoyed helping people understand their rights, it was time to step back and focus on my family and career. During the question and answer period, a woman in the back raised her hand. What would you say to someone who's afraid to fight their HOA? Someone who thinks it's easier to just go along even when they're being treated unfairly? I thought about my answer carefully. I'd say that fear is understandable. Fighting any kind of authority is scary, and HOAs can make your life miserable if they want to. But I'd also say that rights you don't exercise are rights you lose. If everyone just goes along with unreasonable enforcement, then unreasonable enforcement becomes the standard. Sometimes you have to be willing to stand up, not just for yourself, but for everyone who comes after you. You regret any of it? She asked. All the stress and conflict? No. Because at the end of the day, my family was safer, the hospital's emergency procedures were improved, and the laws were changed to help other people facing similar situations. That's worth temporary stress. After the talk, several people came up to thank me and share their own stories. I listened patiently, offered what advice I could, and directed them to resources that might help. But I was also relieved when it was over. I told my story enough times. Now I wanted to move on. Spring arrived in Arizona, bringing warm days and cool nights. The desert bloomed with wildflowers, painting the landscape in unexpected colors. In Desert Vista Estates, people worked on their yards, took evening walks, and gathered at the community pool on weekends. It was peaceful and pleasant, everything a planned community should be. One Saturday morning, I was washing my truck in the driveway when a moving van pulled up across the street. A new family was moving in, a couple with 2 young kids. I walked over to introduce myself. "Welcome to the neighborhood," I said. "I'm Kyle Emerson." "Tom and Lisa Gardner," the man said, shaking my hand. "We're excited to be here. Everyone says this is a great community." "It is," I said. "If you have any questions about the HOA or anything else, feel free to ask." "Actually, we were warned about the HOA," Lisa said. "Our realtor said there was some big controversy a couple years ago about a generator," I laughed. "That was me, but it worked out. The HOA is much more reasonable now." "What happened?" Tom asked. I gave them the short version of the story. They listened with increasingly wide eyes. "Wow," Lisa said when I finished. "So you basically reformed the whole HOA." I wouldn't go that far. A lot of people contributed. But yes, things are better now. Just read the covenants carefully, come to the board meetings, and don't be afraid to speak up if something doesn't seem right. We talked for a few more minutes before they had to get back to directing the movers. As I walked back to my house, I realized that the generator incident had become part of who I was in the community. I was the guy who'd stood up to the HOA. Some people saw that as admirable, others probably thought I was a troublemaker. But either way, it had defined my place in Desert Vista Estates. Jennifer came out with lemonade, making friends with the new neighbors, just giving them the welcome speech. I think they're already scared of the HOA. Can you blame them? After hearing what happened to us? I guess not, but I tried to assure them it's better now. We sat on the front steps, drinking lemonade and watching our kids play in the yard. The generator hummed through its weekly test cycle, a sound so familiar now that I barely noticed it. "You ever think about moving?" Jennifer asked. "Getting away from all the HOA drama?" "Sometimes," I admitted, "but this is home now. The kids have friends here, we know our neighbors, and honestly, the HOA isn't that bad anymore." I'd rather stay and be part of a community I helped improve than run away to start over somewhere else. Good, because I like our house, and I'd hate to go through moving again. That night, after everyone else was asleep, I stood in the backyard looking up at the stars. The Phoenix light pollution dimmed them, but on a clear night you could still see plenty. I thought about the journey of the past year and a half, from that first violation notice to Patricia's arrest to the legislative changes to the new normal we'd established. It had been exhausting and stressful, and sometimes seemed hopeless. But it had also shown me that regular people could make a difference when they stood up for what was right. I wasn't a lawyer or a politician or an activist. I was just a hospital technician who wanted to keep his family safe. But that simple goal had sparked changes that affected thousands of people across Arizona. The generator stood silently now, its weekly test complete. It was just a machine, a box full of metal and wires and moving parts. But it had become a symbol of something larger, the right of homeowners to make reasonable decisions about their own property, the importance of flexibility and common sense in applying rules, and the responsibility of those in authority to consider the real-world impact of their decisions. As I went back inside and locked the door, I felt a deep sense of contentment. My family was safe, my job was secure, and my community was better than it had been. The fight had been worth it. The generator would stand sentinel for years to come, ready to provide power when needed but hopefully never called upon in a real emergency. And every time I saw it, I'd remember the battle it had sparked and the lessons that came from it. Sometimes the most important stands we take are over things that seem small. Sometimes defending your own backyard is how you change the world.